Okay, thank you so much for joining us. My name's Isan Marvel. I'm a senior educational psychologist, and we also have Catherine joining us as
Hi.
well.
Yeah, I'm Catherine Bird. Most people know me as Cat, though, and I work for the SEN team in a learning and development role.
Excellent. So I've been in Somerset since 2013, and we're going to talk about the collaborative outcomes meetings today and what are collaborative outcomes meetings, shortened to COMS. So the comms meeting primarily is about collaboratively, kind of does what it says really, collaboratively agreeing outcomes and provision as part of a EHC needs assessment process. So the EP, so if I would be the EP for that comms, I would be facilitating the meeting. Any other professional involved who knows that child or young person well, family representation, um, staff from early years settings, schools, and post 16 settings would be meeting to jointly agree the outcomes and provision which would appear in the final EHC needs plan if it's agreed.
And just to expand, the RO on the screen there, we're referring to the assessment and reviewing officer from the SEN team.
Absolutely. So they while they do note take, they also do check that the outcomes are smart and that the provision is specific. So they will often double check that as we're going through the meeting. Thanks for that, Kat.
Okay.
So the reason we're having collaborative outcomes meetings, like why are we having them? Why have we changed from the way we used to do them? It is about reducing that arm's length relationship between families and the local authority. Families are well able to contribute to outcomes and the provision which will be in place to support their children in school or the children in their care. It's hope that actually, because of this meeting, families have a better sense of what provision is in place for children and young people. Settings also have a say on the provision being written into a plan. They can contribute to that as well. And the provision isn't solely the responsibility of the educational psychologist. While we contribute and we give ideas, the collaborative outcomes meetings give us a place to shape that, to hear families' views, to hear settings' views, and then to collaboratively agree on outcomes and provision going forward. There is always a collaborative outcomes meeting, regardless of whether it's a yes to issue an education healthcare plan or it's a no to issue, which means that children's needs can be met at SEND support. And another bit of the rationale is one of the things that was kind of highlighted in Ofsted was about the lack of collaboration in our education, health and care plans. And so the comms process was about how could we collaboratively work with settings and families, how could there be greater communication as part of this EHC needs process. It was hoped that because of this process, there'd be fewer amendments and appeals because families had a better sense of what was happening for their children and young people. They felt heard and they actually saw their views reflected in the final education, health and care plan. So far, we are currently working on more data, but between October 2021 and April 2022, we did 77 comms meetings. Currently, between 50 and 75% of all assessments agreed are comms, but at this stage, we were about 40% of comms were being agreed. We did evaluations on them and it was overwhelmingly positive in terms of the feedback from parents and schools and other professionals. They spoke about the increased collaboration. Those who'd had the previous experience where the EP wrote the provision and sent it off and then they got a draft compared to the collaborative outcomes meetings where parents were able to contribute to outcomes and provision. Parents who had experienced both and carers who had experienced both indicated they felt this was an improvement on what was happening before. They felt the communication was greater because they were having the initial conversation with the arrows, but then they were also seeing the arrows and the EPs in the comms meeting. And families and schools felt really positive that arrows, the assessment reviewing officers, were part of this process. So, so also we are currently doing evaluation on when it's a no to issue. So when during the education healthcare needs assessment, it's felt that there will not be a plan issued and that children and young people's needs can be met from the support available at school. Families are still having that collaborative outcomes meetings with the ARROW, with the EP, with schools. We are working on pulling this data together. So that is the priority for autumn term 1. And we are also linking with Milton Keynes because that is a local authority who also do this comms process, and they're a bit further down the line than we are. Their results are similarly very positive. And we have recently, I want to say within the last 3 weeks, Kat, there's
Yes.
been comms guidance published on the local offer. And families who are, or who in the last 3 weeks it's been agreed that the assessment will be a comms assessment, or should be sent that quite soon in the process. So this is a bit of the timeline, just to show you how things run in terms of that statutory timeline, in terms of the weeks, etc. So a decision is made at panel. So either schools or parents request an assessment, or the young person, and within 6 weeks there's that stage 1 decision about whether there's going to be assessment. There's an agree to assess based on the evidence that panel receive. And then there's still 6 weeks where EPs carry out an assessment. They're focusing mainly on strengths and needs. And in the formulation, they are given an indication of the level of provision a child or young person will need. Based on this and other evidence providers, this goes back to panel, and a stage 2 decision is made about whether to issue an education healthcare plan or not. And usually 2 weeks, 14 days roughly after that stage 2 decision about whether to issue an education healthcare plan, regardless of whether it's a yes to issue or a no to issue, there is a comms meeting with schools, family, and key professionals to agree the outcomes and provision. And then this draft plan is still sent, and families and schools still have that 15 days to comment, and then a plan is issued shortly after this meeting. So this is a bit of the timeline of where the comms falls, but the stage 1 and stage 2 decision points are the same. The difference is there is a comms meeting, which usually happens 2 weeks after that stage 2 decision.
And just to be clear, the plan being issued, that would only be if it's a yes to issue. The discussion in the comms, which Isan is going to talk more about in a moment, if it's a no to issue, is a slightly different outcome.
Absolutely, but there's still that collaborative outcomes meeting.
Yes.
So
Yes.
parents and carers are really clear on what provision would be available in school.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of step 1, in terms of the preparation for that meeting, so after it's agreed that it's a yes to assess, the arrow inform the family of the decision, and they explain what the comms process is. They're sending the comms guidance, which is also on the local offer, which also supports parents in understanding what's happening and when, and what can parents do in preparation for that comms meetings. So as I said, the comms meeting usually happens 14 working days after the decision to issue, and the invite is sent from the arrow to EPs, family, other relevant professionals, and representation from the settings. So SENCOs, class teacher, key adults, those adults around school settings who know children and young people well. So this meeting will happen whether there's going to be a plan or not. Thanks, Kat. And so this is what the comms preparation tool looks like. So this is sent to families to support them in knowing actually what, and school staff really, to support them in knowing what do you need to think about to prepare for a comms meeting. So any questions that you might like to discuss at the meeting. Some families fill this in, or some families use this as a guide to help to focus their thoughts. This is sent to support families and setting staff to prepare for that meeting. So are there any questions you want to be sure that you have answered in this meeting? Are you aware of any support or strategies currently in place for your child which work really well? And what are the outcomes that you are hoping for in 1, 3, and 5 years? This does not need to be fully complete, but it's helpful in you preparing for that meeting and for also preparing for that meeting. So this preparation tool is sent when there is a comms meeting, and it's also embedded within the comms guidance, which is on the local offer live. Thanks, Kat. So the arrow completes the basic draft plan when there is a yes to issue. So at this point, local authority have received all the evidence. They've received parent and care appendix A. They've received the appendix and information from school. Appendix, they've received information from health, from educational psychologists. They've received all that information and they pull it together into a document as they prepare for this comms meeting. So what arrows will fill in prior to the comms meeting will be the strengths and the needs and the aspirations, which they've pulled from the evidence that they have. If the parental preference is known in terms of placement, that is detailed on the comms form, but the comms meeting is not focused on placement, but about outcomes and provision. And all appendices will be sent to those who are attending the meeting. And so this is what it looks like in the meeting, but this would be filled in. So if you were attending a comms yes to issue, the child and young person goals and aspirations would be filled in, the strengths would be filled in, the needs would be filled in for those areas of need, and we would be focusing the comms on agreeing the outcomes and provision. Now, I think it's in the next slide where it says the arrow will share their screen. Is that correct? So the arrow often shares their screen and provision is typed on to the screen in terms of outcomes and provision. Now, we've done different versions of this. We've done versions where everyone is on this online or on a machine or on a device, and the arrow shares their screen and we are jointly agreeing outcomes and provision together. We've also had a situation where families felt more supported being in the setting with the school Senko or key adults. And so the family and the school Senko have been together and the arrow has been on the screen and the psychologist. And we've had ones where everybody's been in the room and the arrow has been on the machine sharing the screen. So it's very much what we do. The arrows do try to find out what parents would be most comfortable with, what parent cares would be most comfortable with in terms of facilitating this meeting. The EP does chair the meeting. We do facilitate it, and the arrow is the note taker, and they fill in the comms, but they're also checking that those outcomes are smart and that that provision is specific. The meeting roughly lasts around an hour and a half, but it can be a little bit less or a little bit more. I've been in comms meetings which have been an hour and 15 and some which have been an hour and 45 minutes. So roughly around an hour and a half. So what schools have found is that that preparation tool is quite key to help them to be really prepared for that comms meeting. So they're already having ideas of outcomes and strategies which they know support children and young people. So step 2 is if. So what we're going to talk about now is the common sense support. So this is when it's a no to issue. This is because like during the education and healthcare needs assessment, it's been felt following that assessment that the provision needed to meet the needs of a child or young person can be reasonably provided from resources available in school. So it's saying that these children and young people's needs can be met from resources available at school. And there will still be a comms meeting, but it will be more about comms sense support. The EP will still chair the meeting and facilitate that discussion. There will be a discussion explaining the decision from panel. They will be very much referencing to the Somerset Graduate Response Tool and the SEND support areas, like what support is available in schools from resources that schools have. And the family are able to hear what support can be put in place from resources. And there might be a pre-meeting with the ARA and school to schedule in preparation for this common sense support when it's felt that an education healthcare plan is not going to be issued, or when that decision has been made that it will not be issued. And this is what the document looks like. So there's still the date of the meeting. We still discuss the key discussion points, but there's still outcomes and strategies agreed for all areas of need and who will do what and when will this happen. So what families and schools get, it's still agreed outcomes and strategies and actions, but this will not form be part of the education, health and care plan. This will be part of the SEND support plan, which will be reviewed from within school. So we're thinking about who must attend a collaborative outcomes meetings. So as a minimum, families, educational psychologists and arrows as a minimum attend comms. When there are other professionals involved, we expect settings to attend. However, some comms meetings fell in the holidays and that was very tricky for some settings to attend. I still had some schools, well, I had schools, all the schools attended mine in summer, but that's not always possible. So at a minimum, it's the EP, the arrow, and families. It's very much we would expect settings to do everything to be at the comms meeting, and the vast majority of comms meetings have attendance from settings. And If families do not feel able to engage with the comms process, it's not, oh, families are not going to attend, we're not going to go ahead with the meeting. There are going to be some questions asked to think about how can we support families to attend the comms meeting, what are families' concerns. Arrows will be checking in with families to ensure they've understood the process, maybe having a conversation with setting to see whether they can encourage families to attend. What are their concerns? Are there any potential barriers? What can we do to support families in thinking that this is helpful? And then we might think about, is social care involved? Is phys involved? Is there somebody that can support the family so that they can feel as if they're able to engage? If families still don't feel able to engage in the comms process, the meeting will still happen in terms of agreeing outcomes and provision, and that documentation will still be sent to family for them to comment on, but it's ideal for them to be part of that discussion so they can hear and have a better understanding of the provision that will be in place for their children. So after the meeting, when it's a yes to issue, so there's going to be an education and healthcare plan, the arrow transfers everything onto a draft education, health and care plan, and that is sent out. Families will still have 15 days to make comments, and schools are also can make comments. The quickest, in my experience, that's been done has been 2 days after the meeting, but that doesn't always happen. But because there are already outcomes and provision agreed, they feel familiar to school and families. Actually, when you see the draft education healthcare plan, it shouldn't feel like a surprise because your views have been held within the outcomes and provision. The aim is that hopefully, if we are collaborative, if there is more joined up, if there is increased communication, that there should be fewer changes to the draft plan because families were part of that process and were able to contribute to the outcomes and the provision. So the comms feedback that we've had were that 100% of parents where we kind of got feedback, and of course we're going up for more, rated the collaboration as 5 out of 5. I promise I have not fudged any of this data. This was what was told to us. And this is a bit of the comments, because what does 5 out of 5 mean? So the parent fed back that I felt this was excellent. I felt the overall experience has been great. I've been informed all the way and everything has been explained to me along the way, making the process easier to understand. Everyone involved has been great and really helpful. And also it was helpful and collaborative. Their view was, so this parent had experienced the previous process and they felt normally you just get the paperwork shoved at you, but actually I felt part of this process and it was nice to be able to have a voice. And they felt, but I saw the things that I was saying in that final draft plan, so it felt like I could see my views embedded in that. Thanks, Kat. So school staff as well felt the comms meeting were also better than the previous format. They felt it was useful process, that the caseworker, they meant the arrow, but we know who they mean, was able to contribute with their knowledge of previous plans written. And the EP was great at leading the meeting to create suitable outcomes for the child. And the EP also said the arrow was brilliant at ensuring that our outcomes were smart and that our provision was specific. And they're really good at doing that. They will challenge us to double check that it is specific and everybody is really clear on what that provision looks like. The EP found that really helpful, and the provision ended up being briefer but much more targeted. I think we ended up with a much better set of outcomes and provision than I could have written alone. And so the feedback generally has been that it's been an improvement on the previous process because of the collaborative nature.
I have now an audio to share with everybody. So this is an audio of Claire, who is one of our ROs, one of our assessment and reviewing officers. And it's about 4 minutes long, and she's going to talk about her experience of collaborative outcomes meetings. A lot of what she says goes over lots of the points that Isan has already talked about, but it's probably, we understand this is, can be a complicated process, particularly if it's something that you've only ever heard about today. But you can definitely tell through her reflection on it, just the enthusiasm and the positivity she shares towards the process. So I'll be flicking back through the relevant slides as she's talking. Please let me know though if you can't hear her audio.
Hi, my name is Claire and I'm an assessment and reviewing officer, RO, within the SEN team. A collaborative outcomes meeting or comms meeting is where the RO, the EP, the family, including the young person ideally, with any other professionals and representatives from the educational setting, will write key aspects of the EHC plan together. This is normally scheduled within 2 weeks of the decision to issue panel date. You can expect the meeting to roughly last around an hour and a half. The arrow will be the one generally that sends out the invitation to the comms meeting, and they will have already pre-populated information onto the comms meeting pro forma, where they will have taken advice from any professionals that have written reports, and this will be attached into the file section of the comms meeting invite, so that all of the invitees will be able to see the information, have a chance to appraise the information, and suggest any outcomes or provision that they feel is necessary to add into the comms meeting discussion. So what's the rationale and the observed benefits of this process? Co-producing the outcomes and provision sections of the plan means that all parties can be involved in the plan writing process. And my experience tells me that this creates a really meaningful process for the families. It promotes a collaborative and open forum in which to share any potential concerns or queries, and therefore everyone takes ownership of that plan around the young person. And it also means that the young person and the family are part of the process rather than having the process done to them. And it reduces the arm's length relationship with families, whilst the process of them jointly agreeing outcomes and provision with the setting enables families to feel just so much more confident in the fact that their child's needs can be met within the local school. It's also anticipated, and is generally the case, that actually there should be fewer amendments made to the draft plan, because the families, like I've already said, will feel confident that the needs of their young person are going to be met. And settings are also clear on what provision needs to be put in place. And the hope is that in turn that this should therefore reduce the number of appeals or families being unhappy or surprised when they receive their plan, and the same can be said for the settings too. So the meeting itself. The EP will facilitate the meeting while the arrow will share their screen and the document and input the agreed outcomes and decision for provision being discussed into the document in real time throughout the meeting. The RO will emphasise the need for outcomes and provisions to be as smart as possible, and this is crucial to allow settings to monitor the young person's progression through the long and short-term outcomes, keeping the EHC plan a correct representation of that young person. The EP will normally have suggestions for the outcomes and provisions already prepared, and this hugely supports the time management of the meeting and keeps everyone focused in what actually can be quite pressurised in an hour and a half to get all the information and discussion complete. Now, if the decision is made previous to the comms meeting to not issue by the local authority, the comms meeting does still take place on the scheduled date as planned, with all the attendees present. This gives the opportunity for families and settings to discuss the way in which the young person's needs can be met, but without the EHC plan, and again, to help families feel confident in the support that their young person will receive from their setting. After the meeting, the RO will ensure that everything is typed into the provision and outcomes and that it's really specific and appropriate. And then the draft will go through internal checks and be sent out. And the aim is that due to the successful comms process, there should be very few changes required to the plan, if any. So in conclusion, I can say with complete confidence that the comms process from my perspective has been entirely positive, and feedback which I've encountered has echoed the same sentiment. It's empowering and a positive process for all parties, and I really look forward to this process becoming embedded moving forward.